Hello, I'm Steve Lamb. I'm with the Center for Progressive Urban Politics. We're here today talking with Ian Ruskin, who's doing a one-man show and a movie on America's true founding father, Tom Paine. It's good to meet you, Ian.
Hi, good to meet you.
Yes. Can you tell us just briefly how you happened as an Englishman to get involved with Tom Paine, of all people?
Well, yes, I have another play about Harry Bridges,
Okay.
Australian labor leader, and I was performing the play on the East Coast.
Okay.
This is 6 years ago, and three different people within a week said, you should do Thomas Paine.
Ah,
And I didn't really know about him, not very much at all,
okay.
because he's not taught in England, he's not really taught here.
He's not taught, yeah, I was going to say, he's not taught either.
So I read a book, a biography, and just was fascinated by him. And then, so he became, in my mind, the next person I wanted to write a play about. And then I got what's called a COLA fellowship, a City of Los Angeles fellowship to write the play. I found 5 scholars who kind of watching over my shoulder while I wrote. And then I started performing.
There are 5 Paine scholars?
Oh yes, yes.
Oh, amazing.
There are quite a few.
Really?
He's one of those people who is revered by the people who really understand what he did and who he was. And there are a lot of courses at university level, and certainly there are major scholars of the Revolution who understand his huge importance.
You know, Paine, I called him in the introduction the true founding father of America. And I really believe he was, but he's almost completely invisible on the American consciousness and public debate and landscape. I mean, occasionally you'll find, a short snippet and misquote. Why do you think it is that Paine is obscured in American history and not really read as part of the normal American educational curriculum?
Okay, that's a good question. He was the most radical founding father. He was outside of the establishment. He was not a plantation owner. He was not a rich merchant. He'd only come to Philadelphia when he was 37. He was passionately against slavery, which was part of the foundation of the whole economic system. He was in favor of all men voting, all men, including black men, but also including poor men, including men who didn't really know how to read or write.
And let me stop you there for a second. At that time in American history, only landowners could vote.
Oh, well, yes, the great discussion amongst, when they were drawing up all the documents, was as to which of the white men should vote and how much they would need to be worth to vote. And it came down to $50.
Which was a lot of money.
A lot of money.
300 years ago.
Yes. In fact, I mentioned this in the play, there was a very famous case of a man at the time who, he sort of fell on hard times and he had to sell his ass. And by doing that, he went below the $50 level and he lost the right to vote. And Benjamin Franklin said, wherein lies the vote? In the man or in the ass? And that became a phrase that people would use when there was something absurd. They'd say, oh, in the man or in the ass, meaning that's absurd. But that was so that debate as to the right to vote has been going on since the very beginning of this nation.
Right.
So the other thing he did, he wrote for the common man in his language, in his thought processes. He wrote in what he said were short, simple sentences, and compared to everybody else, they were.
So that is an amazing thing. I mean, as I was in my youth, before I became an architectural historian, I was just sort of a normal historian. And
there are normal historians?
Well, run-of-the-mill generalist historian. And when you read Paine, he seems astoundingly modern in his language. When you read other people from his era, they're stilted, they're unduly complex in their sentence structure. They, you have to you get a headache sort of reading them if you're a modern person. You read Paine and you think, well, the guy who wrote this last week.
Yes.
I mean, he's astoundingly modern, and that kind of begs the question, of course, again, why isn't he more well read? But you're right. When you read him, we really, as a nation, didn't begin to get to the point where he was in his thought process in 1775. We didn't really begin to get there till the 1960s.
Yes, or the 30s at least.
Maybe the 30s at least.
Yes, and I mean, we can, as he progressed through his life, he became, you might say, more radical.
Yes.
And I have a couple of passages I can read at some point. But he had a vision of America that was it was about true equality, and that's not what the establishment wanted. They wanted to be free of the monarch, partly because of Paine's common sense, but they did not want the common people running the country.
The
Because-
mobocracy is
Yes, they didn't trust them.
right.
And they wanted, by they, I mean particularly people like John Adams, who was perhaps the other end of the spectrum. Alexander Hamilton actually said that the government should have a distinct and permanent place for the rich and well-born
How nice.
to check the imprudence of democracy. Democracy was not a popular word. When Common Sense came out, John Adams actually said, he panned it, and he said it is so democratical.
And like that was a dirty word, almost like
Yes.
saying it's communist.
Yes, because it was a real
50s.
debate about, well, how can you trust ignorant, uneducated men, not women of course, but men,
Right.
to have any political power?
And-
This was the crucial discussion. I mean, John Adams, towards the end of his life, wanted people to call him Your Majesty.
How very nice. Really.
So,
You know, it's amazing when you read Common Sense, and I would encourage everyone who's listening to please go to your bookstore and buy the collected works of Paine. It's $9. But when you read Common Sense, what you're really struck with is today you read Common Sense as an American, and that's kind of like your background philosophical approach. You believe everything Tom Paine's telling you because the basic concepts are what you're taught America is all about in Common Sense. And yet, at the time he wrote Common Sense, it was extremely radical. It was farther than anyone had gone in their beliefs about what was possible to achieve in terms of democracy or a democratic republic. And it was seditious and treasonous.
yes.
I don't know this for sure. I've never inquired about this, but I'm sure that the crown could have had him killed for having written that.
He could have been hung, I
Yes.
think. There's some debate about whether the first edition or two maybe were written by an Englishman, and he then put his name to the second or third edition. I'm not quite sure about that. But it was definitely, in theory, it was treason.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, he calls the crown nothing but a brute, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
and he's certainly not respectful of even the concept of monarchy. You
No.
know, he basically says, you know, monarchy, or the idea of monarchy, is a delusion, and the monarchs themselves are deluded in believing that they are a superior species of human being.
Yes. I mean, all through his life, he was never against monarchs. He always, when there was the debate about whether to execute the French king, he said monarchs should be given the distinct privilege of becoming private citizens. But he was against the monarchy.
Yes.
He wanted to bring the monarchy down, but not by killing the monarch. Make the monarch a private citizen.
Well, and that would be a very interesting experiment. Let's see how the monarch does when he's put on an equal footing with everyone else.
But be stumbling around, I should
Yeah,
think.
yeah, I should think. No servants to go get him dinner or wipe his ass.
Yeah.
So Paine, you know, had this radical belief. And this was not just some pamphlet that, you know, 5 people read. I mean, at the time, the population of the United States was approximately 1 million people, and they believe somewhere around 200,000 copies were produced.
Yep.
And so that means a distribution in copies of 1 in 5. But in those days, people typically, when they had pamphlets and books, they would distribute them to their friends to read in turn.
It's my cell phone, sorry.
Okay, we'll cut.
Let me just
Get moving more
turn
to
it.
the,
I'll turn
you
it.
know, today and
Right.
the message for today.
I'll just let it finish ringing and I'll turn it off.
Let me make sure mine's off too.
I haven't turned my phone off, actually. I don't even quite know how to do that. Well, we'll hope.
Okay.
Nobody ever phones me anyway, so.
Of
At
course.
least no one interesting, just the people trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Okay,
So-
where were we? Okay.
So Paine's book, Common Sense, his initial book, they think somewhere around 200,000 copies were printed and distributed. The population of the United States at that time was about 1 million people, which means he had a distribution of 1 in 5 at a minimum, but it was typical in that day for people to get a book or a pamphlet and they would pass it around amongst their friends. So typically if one book was sold, 3 to 5 people would read it,
Yes.
which would mean almost the entire country on the eve of the revolution had read Tom Paine. And that's why I say, you know, he's the founder, really, the real founding father of America, because he was the one who really pushed the idea that we shouldn't just get a better deal from the monarchy, we should step away from the monarchy.
Right. And there were 2 things about Common Sense. One was, as you said, the way it was written. It was written so an ordinary man or woman could read it.
Right.
But the second thing is, after the first edition of I think 1,000 copies, he then printed 6,000 himself, charging half the price of the first edition. And he then renounced all rights to the book.
Wow.
And that's why, so anyone could print it, and no money came to him. Now, this was incredibly wise, because if you think, if he had printed 10,000 copies or 20,000 copies, it would have been a book that would have been discussed. But he, by giving up all rights, lots of people were very happy to print it then and make some money out of it.
Oh yeah.
It's the closest to putting things on the internet today. I mean, in a way, he was the first, and he did this throughout his life. He always gave away the rights. He was almost like the first blogger, because his thinking was to get as many copies published and into as many people's hands as possible. That's what he wanted.
So he was focused on the expansion of the penetration of his ideas into the popular.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now he didn't just end with Common Sense. He
began.
He
Common
just
Sense.
began.
Yeah.
And he kept evolving his concepts of equality. And you have something there that is one of my favorite Paine passages.
Oh, yes.
that you
Shall I
could-
read it?
And that really sort of speaks to his view of the kind of country America could evolve towards.
Right. And now this is from Rights of Man,
Right.
which he wrote in France during the Revolution, having left America because he was very disappointed with what had happened in America after the Revolution.
Because basically the aristocracy had reassumed
You had
power.
2 classes, yes. You had the people who'd made the money from the Revolution and everybody else. And you still had slavery, and he was gone by the time the Constitution was actually written, but he was very disappointed in that, because he felt it, as I say in the play, it preserved the power of the powerful, and it preserved the shame of slavery. So, from France, he writes Rights of Man, which in one sense is directed at the French Revolution, but as you say, this was his concept of what the world should be like. And this was the beginning of what in America became known as the New Deal in the
Yes.
1930s.
Yeah, so it was like 200 years from the
Almost,
time he
yes,
wrote
yes,
this to the
incredible.
time.
So this is literally from, most of this is from Rights of Man. When it shall be said in any country in the world, my poor are happy. Neither ignorance nor distress is to be found among them. My jails are empty of prisoners, my streets of beggars. The aged are not in want. The taxes are not repressive. The rational world is my friend because I am a friend of happiness. When these things can be said, then may that country boast of its constitution and its government. And he then starts to lay out his vision of, well, the elderly, the widowed, newly married couples, the poor, the unemployed, disbanded soldiers and children who would be required to attend school must be provided for from state funds. And all this support is not the nature of charity, but of a right, and it will be paid for through general taxation. And he then goes on to say, because he was a deist, he was not an atheist, we could come to that. But I think this is a most amazing quote. We are all children of God, and the greatest offence of all to the great Father is when we seek to torment and render each other miserable. That was Paine's vision of how the world should be run.
Well, that's amazing because, of course, the people who are championing Paine today, who I have serious doubts as to how much of him they've read, are the Tea Party. And if you read Paine's later works, like on agrarian justice,
Yes.
he actually talks about nature, all land, all water, all the wealth of the physical world having been in the state of nature, the commonwealth of mankind.
Yes, he says God gave the earth to men and women for their inheritance.
Right. And Paine believes in something that would just give a modern neocon a heart attack. He actually talks about 100% death tax on property, basically, and where the property is taken over by the state and resold in order to support, senior citizens,
Yes.
young people starting out in life, and basically, the property gets resold more or less every generation, and every generation has the chance to become wealthy. But this method of taxation destroys the ability to grow an inherent oligarchical or aristocratic class.
Mm-hmm.
And so the brilliance of it not only is that it provides for the general society, but it destroys that thing which is the enemy of equality.
Right, and I see him in an arc from Paine to Karl Marx to Harry Bridges, because Bridges was a Marxist. Now,
Right.
well, some of my professors have said that Paine was a social democrat. He was not a Marxist as such. Obviously, he couldn't be before Marx in a way.
Well,
But-
Marx perhaps was a Painist.
Well, I think they all had the same desire of a redistribution of wealth and of an attempt to care for those who cannot care for themselves. Now, for Paine, it was basically through taxation, through the breaking up of and taxing of estates, and taking that money into a general fund, which would pay for what we now call unemployment, welfare, food stamps, social security, all of that. For Marx, it was revolution. And for Harry Bridges, it was through negotiation as a union. But it was all about taking some of the wealth or profits and giving them back to the people.
What do you think Paine would say to America in our current condition with the not only the 1%, but perhaps the 1% of the 1% basically controlling all the wealth and production of land in the country? Would he be calling for a second or third, perhaps, American Revolution?
He might. I mean, I certainly think he would be appalled
Yes.
by... See, to me, two of the words that are used a lot when people talk about America and the revolution are democracy and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paine's word was equality, because Paine saw, as there was I have to paraphrase Martin Luther King, who once said, it doesn't mean much if you have the right to sit at a lunch counter if you've got no money to buy a hamburger. I'm badly paraphrasing.
But exactly.
But that principle that, not that Paine was not looking for everyone to be the same. He saw there would always be people who were rich, but he wanted the gap the gap would astound him today.
Oh yeah.
And it's such a gap where something like 15 million American children are perpetually hungry in a country where you have people who make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So and he would not be trying to take down Wall Street. He'd want a whole lot of taxations on some of those transactions. He'd want things that help to slightly equal the balance. He had an idea that with the estate taxes and all the other taxes, from this piece I read, that every person at age 21 would be given a sum of money.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound like a lot when you say what
like
the sum of money
£15,
is.
but it was enough that you could buy maybe a couple of cows or a
Some
plow,
tools.
get a little bit of land and start off. And Paine said that it did two things. It gave you hope to start your life. It also made it much less likely that you would end up a burden on the state. Because you would be given a start and you would eventually have enough land under your control, because Paine said you never actually own land.
Well, he's really right about
Yeah,
that.
he said what you own is what you grow. That you own, and it's on that you have to give some of that profit back to the community. But you never own the land. But so if you have 10, 20 acres, you might be able to grow enough food to at least feed yourself and not have to go to the state for food. So this was his thinking, that everyone should be given not absolute equality, but you had to have equality of voting, equality of, he believed in his idea about banks, and he helped found the first ever bank in America by putting in almost every penny he had into the bank, was that a bank, you would come to the bank as we might say a middle class person, I guess, for a loan to, then it would be to buy a few acres of land, buy some tools, or buy some products that you would then sell in a grocery store. That you would, and then it would help you start off, and then you would pay the money back.
So it's like a micro loan system.
Yes, the bank would not be there to make money for the bank or for the bank manager. The bank was there to give people a leg up towards equality. It was always equality, I think, that was his word.
And that's, I mean, amazingly absent from our public discourse now.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that I watched the most recent State of the Union, right? And there's this new, the phrase is MiddleClass Economics.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's what Paine was talking about in 1790. I mean, he didn't call it middle class because you didn't have that word. But,
yeoman, probably.
yes, or the common man. I guess things always come around again. But if he was here today, he'd be on the internet 18 hours a day. I think.
Okay.
He'd be WikiLeaking. He'd be exposing anything he could get his hands on, because he was really the first leaker of government information.
Oh.
With the thing called the Silas Deane incident. It was to do with this man who was sent to France to raise money for the war, but also worked for a financier. And they were bringing back gunpowder marked up 500%, things like that.
Well, nothing's really changed much.
No. In fact, the financier was the head of the committee that gave out the contract to supply the Continental Army, and the committee gave this contract in its entirety to the company owned by Robert Morris, the chairman of the committee. And there were no other bids.
No bid contracting. Wow.
Well, that's Halliburton, I think.
Yeah, that's
how things repeat.
wow.
But yeah, he would be. I mean, I think he would have been very taken with the Occupy movement.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be doing everything. I think he'd be leading the way in terms of healthcare, which, because in his time there wasn't really a lot of talk about healthcare. It was a whole different world where there were like doctors who would come around.
Whether or not we're going to get blood with leeches today.
Right.
I mean,
but he would see healthcare as a right,
Oh, I think so.
a right of equality.
Mhm.
He would be regretful that England still has a monarch, because he really did want to get rid of the monarch.
What do you think he would think of this bizarre fascination and near worship most Americans have of the British crown?
Well, I think he would say, you know, I understand they have lovely palaces and they have lots of jewels, but if you had ever had to live under them, you would not be so taken with the whole idea. I mean, it's kind of ironic in a sense, the English Queen does not really have very much political power, and the American president has, I think, far more power than the English Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been a certain shift, and the English are, I think, divided between those who love the monarch and those who think it's a load of old rubbish.
Well, so we at least know that there are a lot of English people who are pretty smart because they know it's a load of
yes, I
rubbish.
mean, there's a different idea about patriotism in England than America. I mean, really, you can buy toilet paper that has the picture of the Queen on it. I think. I mean, if you really want to.
I'm sure you can buy
Yeah.
toilet paper that has a picture of the president.
Well, maybe, but also you probably the Union Jack. I mean, this idea of the sacred flag, and nobody pledges allegiance. I mean, they gave up playing the national anthem about 30 years ago in England before any event,
Oh, wow.
because people would just sit there, wouldn't be bothered. You know, it's a different kind of idea of patriotism. Maybe because America's a much younger country, so.
Well, also
So-
perhaps because they went through two major world wars extremely close to them that had a kind of equalizing effect, and also made it really hard to believe in all of these pompous institutions.
Well, maybe, yes. I mean, I think Paine he'd be glad that the monarch no longer has real political power, because they did then, and we now know that George III was mad, probably through hereditary syphilis.
Yes. I was going to say syphilitic and insane. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there have been a few rather inept American presidents also, but that's for another
A
time.
long list of those.
But he would be glad about that. But I think he would still, apart from the political power and all the money that's owned by the royal family in England and other royal families, he objected to the idea that someone was born superior to other people.
Don't we have that idea going on in America now? That, I mean, the way that we've in the neocon revolution since Reagan, the way that we've rejiggered American society, basically, if you're very wealthy to start with, you have the opportunities people had perhaps in the 1960s as almost a general right. And if you're not one of those wealthy people, we have arranged our society in such a way to completely lock you out, so that in effect we have by inheritance opportunity and aristocracy, if not in law per se.
No, I think that's true. A lot of the wealth in America and in other Western nations is inherited wealth.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just, there are people who work very hard and come up from nothing and become millionaires. Yes, that happens. But far more of the people who are rich today, they didn't create it themselves. It's family money. They were passed on the position. And the other thing that Paine would object to, and which we all obviously object to, is this idea that if you're not rich, there are one of two reasons. You're either lazy or you're stupid. But it's one of those two reasons why you're not rich. Because in America, anyone can become a millionaire, which is true, except you can't all become millionaires. There isn't
Right.
enough money for that. So it's not.
Well,
a
if
case
there
of
was,
being
in order to be
stupid.
rich, you'd have to have $1 trillion.
Well, yes. I mean, I think Paine would find that really objectionable. It's going back to when at one point he said, any man who fought in the revolution, for that alone has a right to vote.
Absolutely.
Even if he has no money, if he has nothing. The fact that he put his life on the line. In other words, Paine had much more respect for just everyone, ordinary people, than the society does today in America. Yes, it's very clear that if you're born into poverty, it's really hard to get out. Some people do, but it's really hard to get beyond your neighborhoods. I mean, it's on every possible level. It's hard to eat well when there are no places that sell fresh food. And what do? You don't have a car. You're going to take 2 hours to go to a grocery store somewhere else to buy some fresh broccoli, you know. So there are so many levels where Paine would be still fighting the same fight for equality for all, a basic equality for all Americans. He wouldn't be trying, he was not a Marxist, he was certainly not a communist. He wasn't trying to have everybody be the same, but he wanted a basic
She
sharing
wanted to
of
set
wealth.
the floor fairly high.
Yes, a whole lot higher than it is now.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And you're working to reintroduce Americans to Paine. You're developing a film.
Yes.
And what is that called, and how can people support your film?
Oh, thank you. The film will be a film by one-man play
Okay.
in front of a live audience. The play is called To Begin the World Over Again.
Which was a phrase Paine used, yeah.
Yes, as did Reagan and Sarah
Reagan.
Palin and all other kinds of people. But To Begin the World Over Again, the Life of Thomas Paine. So we've done an Indiegogo campaign,
Okay.
a crowdfunding campaign. We have a couple of foundations. We have 2 Thomas Paine societies. So basically, we're going to film it on the 3rd of March
Okay. And
Which is-
where?
at the Lillian Theatre in Hollywood.
Okay.
If you go to my website, which is thelifeofthomaspaine.org, there's a link to the film project, which tells you about the film. We're still sorting out like how we're going to sort of sell or give tickets to people, but that would be the place to go to look at how you could potentially get tickets. We're still raising funding. I mean, we have
Okay.
we have enough. We have enough money to film it. We have enough money to do the basic post production, but we still need to raise money, and that's all on the site. And as with the Indiegogo, when you give, we had people give. One person gave $10,000. One person gave $1. And you can give anything in between, and then you get thank you gifts.
Oh.
My living room is full of the gifts I'm like mailing out now. Of
We
all
saw that
kinds of
actually
things,
when we came in. Yeah.
Copies of books, compasses, wonderful posters. This poster here is one of the thank you gifts. So yes, the idea is to follow in the footsteps of my first play, which we filmed, and which they're called NETA. They distribute to PBS.
Okay.
They distributed the Harry Bridges film. This one they're really excited about because Paine is far better known than Bridges. So the idea is hopefully to have it on PBS. Bridges was on for 4 years. We also wanted to try to get it onto either BBC or Channel 4 in England, France Télévision in France, which is their PBS, because he was very important in the French Revolution. Canadian broadcasting, Australian. I mean, because Paine said, "I am a citizen of the world." So
He was really the first person to say that.
yes. So this, as I said to you earlier, it's up to you whether you like or dislike what Paine said and wrote, but you should know what he said,
Yes.
know what he believed in, understand what his vision of America was, and then you can, like it or not, you can fight on for it or not. So the whole purpose of the film is really to let people understand what he actually wrote, and also his life, which was extraordinary. He came to Philadelphia when he was 37, having done nothing in the world. He started the American Revolution. He defined the French Revolution. He created really for the masses the concept of reason, with Age of Reason. He invented the New Deal with agrarian justice. He did all these extraordinary things. He was nearly guillotined. He was nearly hung. When he came back to America, they refused to let him vote because they said he wasn't an American. I mean, his life was just extraordinary. So the play is also, I think, entertaining, and he was funny, and he had wit, and he had sadness in his private life. It was everything. It's a Hollywood script that if you wrote it, people would say, "I'm sorry, this is too ridiculous. We can't do this." But it's all true.
It's all true.
Yeah.
And please really go to the website And also go to your local bookstore, buy the collected works of Thomas Paine. It's $9. It is the most important single book you as a free person can read. Thank you.
Thank you.